What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV, aka Darth Apocalypse. All right, so let's go ahead and get to it. So, before I get into this video, shout out to the brother Aram for the $8 donation via the PayPal. And I do see your other video requests, Aram, the older ones. I think it's two other ones. I'm going to knock those out. Kind of getting all the way caught up now with the video requests. Um, should be all caught up probably by about Wednesday or Thursday. So let you know about that. So this is a different one. He says, Mike, are the Honeymooners the greatest sitcom of all time? We may have done this one before, but this has to be some groundbreaking stuff. This show was 50 years before its time. Well, I'll say if it's not the greatest sitcom of all time, because there's some other contenders. I Love Lucy. I would put All in the Family up there. Seinfeld is up there. MASH is up there. I know a lot of people probably rolled their eyes when I said MASH. There's some other contenders, obviously. The Cosby Show is up there. No matter what you think about Bill Cosby. Cheers, maybe. But I definitely believe that The Honeymooners is the most influential sitcom of all time. Because for a while, we saw a lot of copycat type sitcoms where there is the struggling husband who's dealing with, life as it comes. He's always trying his best to better himself and his family, but things just don't work out. He has all these get rich quick schemes that just never seem to work. He tries and tries, but he fails. And you root for him, but he fails. He's never going to be more than what he is. And his wife, oftentimes long suffering. And then, sometimes you look at it like, damn, why does she like this guy? Why does she love this guy? Because she loves him because of the fact that for all of his flaws, he's a truly great man, a loyal man. And in a world where there aren't many things you can count on, she could always count on him being in her corner and vice versa. So when it comes to those types of shows, that was the first one. And there's always been variations of that. When you look at Married with Children, Al just embraced his loserdom. Peggy was not a hardworking housewife like Alice Cramden. She was the opposite. Matter of fact, I always try to figure out how the hell Peggy never got fat. She did gain weight during the tenure of that show, or the run of that show, I should say. But it all went to the right place. So, Then you have the fat husband, hot wife dynamic. We've seen that copied a couple times. Most notably, on the top of my head, The King of Queens. That's also the show that had the breakout, the breakout character that everybody loves, the zany character, Norton. And that was one of the most repeated things that we saw in sitcoms afterwards. It was always this zany character, whether it's the Andy Griffith Show, which I forgot to mention is one of the great sitcoms of all time. The Andy Griffith Show, where you had Ernest T. Bass, or maybe even a guy like Gomer, who wound up getting his own show. Or You know, when you look at a show like Seinfeld with Kramer, obviously, or Family Matters with Urkel, or Happy Days with the Fonz. When you had Laverne and Shirley debut Mork, this zany character, this alien from Ork, who wound up getting his own show. Norton was the first breakout zany character. Then also, of course, with the Honeymooners, I think another thing that helped the show was, aside from it just being funny, the way the show looks. Um, by that I mean it has, like I Love Lucy, especially in an era where you have young people who are very concerned about the quality of the film, HD quality. And over the years, I've grown kind of spoiled by that because, when I was a kid, I didn't complain about the fact that the quality of, television was so bad compared to today in the late 80s and 90s that sometimes I used to watch the Bulls play. I know a lot of you guys had this problem too. How many times did you guys watch the Chicago Bulls play? And sometimes you had problems differentiating between who was Ron Harper and Michael Jordan on the court. You had to squint like, okay, the darker one got to be Mike. That's how bad the quality was sometimes with some of those televisions before we start getting more and more HD quality TV. So, but now it's to the point where if I'm watching, I've gotten so spoiled by HD quality that I can't watch any of that original film. I have to watch the HD remastered versions of those games. But that helps with the Honeymooners. They were filmed in front of a live audience, if I'm not mistaken, with 35 millimeter film, and they used 3 different cameras at the same time simultaneously. Same thing with I Love Lucy, and that's why the footage, even to this day, some 70 years after they're showing up the air, it looks so good compared to the lost episodes from the Jackie Gleason show, when it was a Jackie Gleason show on DeMont, and then even with CBS, especially with DeMont, it was one camera. I think one camera that used 35 millimeter kinescope, and that's why the quality looks terrible compared to the classic 39. So let me talk about something else before I go forward. A little bit of an origin here. So Jackie Gleason, for the first 14 years or so of his career, was sort of struggling. He first entered Hollywood when he was 19 years old. He had a bit uncredited cameo in, I think, a 1936 film. I forgot the name of it. He was like a passenger on a yacht or some shit, or about to board a yacht or something. And he had these little bit parts in films in the late 30s, early 40s. But his career never took off, partly because he was chubby. Even back then, he was sort of chubby. Then he infamously lost 60 pounds. And then all of a sudden, Hollywood said, well, you're not funny anymore. You're not funny. You're not as funny when you're skinny. So then he fell into a big depression, went on the gorging spree, and gained 50 pounds in 2 months. So he went back to theater, if I'm not mistaken, doing nightclubs for much of the 40s. And once he hit his 30s, he still was sort of struggling. He had some success, but he wasn't a huge success in the entertainment business. And it wasn't until I forgot exactly what the show was that he got all these rave reviews. I know he was a sailor. What is it? Navy Blues or Navy? He played a sailor on a Broadway show or some play, and they got a lot of rave reviews. And then he got an offer to take over from William Bendix in the Life of Rowley television show in 1949. And he did he did a serviceable job, but he wasn't William Bendix. But it was when he got cast to take over as a revolving host on a fledgling DeMont Network show called, I think it was called Cavalcade of Stars in 1950. Because when he took over, I think in the summer, when he did his guest spot in the summer or fall of 1950, it didn't really do that well. And it had like a revolving host, like a different host for a couple of weeks. It would have one host for a couple of weeks and then another guy. But Jackie Gleason was so successful in the sketch comedy format that the Cavalcade of Stars eventually was retooled, if I'm not mistaken, as the Jackie Gleason Show. And he became a huge hit on the DeMont Network. So much so that he became the network's only real hit. He was keeping the network afloat because at one point in time, it used to be 4 major networks. It used to be, you know how when we was kids for a little while, it was like CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox, and then the cable channels. Well, in the early 1950s into the mid 1950s, it was ABC, CBS, NBC, and the DeMont Network. Matter of fact, the DeMont Network was the first network, if I'm not mistaken, I might be wrong with this, but I believe it was the first network to have a contract with the NBA. And they used to broadcast Minneapolis Lakers games on the DeMont Network. George Mikan games. George Mikan Lakers. Might as well call it George Mikan games. But he was so successful and so popular on the DeMont Network that he took advantage of that. He took leverage of that. He was asking for loans for the network to help cover his debts. He took out, they gave him one loan. He asked for another one. They said, who the fuck you think you are? He said, you're not bigger than the network. So he got ticked off by that. And at the same time, CBS was offering him a contract because his contract was going to run out with the DeMont Network. They offered him a contract. I think it was something like, I want to say 5 years, $11 million, which in 1950s is the equivalency of offering like a 5-year, $140 or $30 million contract today. So that was enormous money. Matter of fact, I might be a little off with the years. It might have been, I think it was 5 years. I think it was 5 years, 11 million. So that's how the Jackie Gleason Show started. It was a variety show, and it was a huge hit. It was so successful because the show used to air on Saturday nights, and that's a night when people go out and have fun, right? I don't know what the fuck they did in the 50s, whatever they did to have fun in the 50s. But it was so successful that people were staying home on Saturdays to watch the Jackie Gleason Show. So they started nicknaming him, before they started calling him the Great One, he was called Mr. Saturday Night. So a lot of people thought he was crazy when he retooled the show in 1955-56 to be a half-hour situational comedy called The Honeymooners. And as revered as the show is now, it was not a success when it first aired. When it was the Jackie Gleason Show, he was getting ratings like, I think he was getting like a 42 share. It was crazy ratings. But when it was the Honeymooners, the ratings were kind of pretty much cut in half. I want to say it was like maybe a top 30 show at best. It did not do very well in the ratings. And the very next show, he went back to the variety format. But it was when the Honeymooners went into syndication in 1957 that the audience was picked up for the show. And that's when it became truly popular and they became iconic. So much so that, if I'm not mistaken, I think since 1957, the Honeymooners has been airing somewhere on television continuously since then. It kind of reminds me of like the Stooges. The Three Stooges were with Columbia as shorts. They did short features from 1934 to 1958, I think, or 59. I think 1958. And the quality of these shorts began to decline in the Shemp era. And toward the end, toward the end of the tenure with like the Joe Besser era, the quality of the shorts was so poor, and the studios did not make a lot of money. While they were led to believe by Columbia, and their boss was, what was his name? Harry Cohn. Harry Cohn had mob ties. Harry Cohn was a very unscrupulous, evil motherfucker, basically, very malicious boss. And he lied to them about the studio, lied to the studios about how successful the Stooges were as far as profit is concerned. They didn't know how popular they really were. And the studio got rich while Mo and Larry, comparatively, Mo, Larry, Curly, or who after Curly, Shemp and then Joe, they got nickel and dime to death. To the point where for a little while after their contract with Columbia ended, Mo was a gopher for the studio, like fetching people sandwiches and parking cars and shit. Man, it was sad. So it was when those old Stooge shorts, especially the Curly and early Shemp ones, were put in syndication. It was a hit. A hit. I mean, they were like doing incredibly good, incredible numbers with kids, and that's what helped to cause a revival of their careers. And they were able to start doing movies in the '60s. In the last few years of their life, they enjoyed a lot of success. So, yeah, the Honeymooners became very successful after their initial run. And I don't know if I said this, but there would be no Archie Bunker if there was no Ralph Cramden. There wouldn't be a lot of these sitcoms if it wasn't for the Honeymooners. They're the ones that had the blueprint for the situational comedy where every episode it would be a different, um, a different crises or a different plot development where, this episode Ralph, thinks he lost his job, or Ralph thinks that Alice, for the 18th time, is cheating on him in some ridiculous manner. He overhears something, and his imagination gets the best of him. And even though Norton is trying to give him sage advice, that that's not in her character, his paranoia and love of the woman gets the better of him, and at the end, he professes his love to her, tell her how much of a dope he is. And then, of course, you had the wild expressions, the catchphrases. That's another thing that the Honeymooners did. The catchphrase, "Pow, right in the kisser." That's probably number one. Bang, zoom. You are a mental case, which is kind of retired after a little while. Va 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 boom. The thing that Norton did, where whenever he was getting ready to start doing something, he had to wave his hands maniacally in the air, or whatever, right? Which he actually, Art Carney took from his father, because his father did something, but he just exaggerated a bit. But yeah, it was very influential, man. So I would say it's definitely the most influential sitcom of all time. But anyway, tell me what you guys think.